Alzheimer's disease is a nightmare condition. It's a nightmare for the person who suffers from it as they feel themselves slowly fade away, and for loved ones who watch this happen. What is not well known is that Alzheimer's disease, in large measure, is caused by chronic diet-induced inflammation. And this has been known for a long time, but now what we see emerging are research articles that look at genes. So you can see here, new research points to involvement of immunity and inflammation as causal trigger of the disease. Now, when it comes to inflammation causing the condition, this has been my position for 30 years now, but this is shockingly not the view of some researchers over the years. So we can see here, there's a lot of evidence that an elevated immune response, including inflammation in Alzheimer's brain, but historically, incorrectly by the way, historically, it's been thought that these inflammatory changes were caused by the disease itself. Now this is sort of ridiculous thinking. One does not they're not walking along, sitting along, watching TV, playing golf, some old guy. The next thing you know, he has Alzheimer's disease, and he had no inflammation prior to the disease manifesting itself. What's not understood is these are chronic inflammatory states that progress over time, ultimately emerging with symptoms. So in this paper, they talk about a handful of genes. Here they are in the paper we just looked at from Medscape. These are the genes they talk about there. This new paper that came out in August of this year, talk about these genes. The ApoE gene has been popular for many, many years. Many other genes are being found now that are involved in the expression of Alzheimer's disease, which can draw people's attention away from behavior that we engage in that create the chronic inflammatory state that turns these genes on or off, depending upon if they're promoters or inhibitors. So my suggestion is not to get wrapped up in the names of the genes and worrying about the genes, because our lifestyle influences our genes to express. And this whole is the case for almost all chronic inflammatory conditions. So Alzheimer's being one, Parkinson's being another. Remember, cutting inflammation is the key to preventing these conditions and preventing their progression. Down below we can see type 2 diabetes is a risk for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, or they're related. So diabetes, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, osteoarthritis, painful menstruation, premenstrual syndrome, all these conditions are chronic inflammatory states that once the inflammatory activity in the body becomes sufficient enough, various symptoms or conditions emerge, which is why you see in the back of my book Alzheimer's, depression, dysmenorrhea, so painful periods, infertility, PMS, heart disease, chronic pain, cancer, all are manifestations of the chronic flame. Now this video is about Alzheimer's disease, and so when the first paper that I saw that made this statement clearly, that Alzheimer's is a chronic inflammatory state of the brain, was back in 1990. So we'll zoom in here at the beginning of the paper. Evidence points to a chronic inflammatory state of the brain in Alzheimer's disease. And they also commented that patients with rheumatoid arthritis being treated with anti-inflammatory drugs had unexpectedly low expressions of Alzheimer's disease, and that using anti-inflammatory therapy might be the explanation. So that's what got me interested in Alzheimer's as a chronic inflammatory condition, because you have to realize that back, well, really it's like the last 5 to 10 years, the research has demonstrated clearly that all these chronic diseases are actually chronic inflammatory states. But back in 1990, this was just not really common terminology. So this is one of the papers that got me looking at this in even greater detail. I realized back in the late 80s that nutrition drove inflammation and that this would likely be associated with most conditions, but the actual research wasn't there to a significant degree. So this is one of the first ones that hit me. So I've spent time looking at all these various conditions for their inflammatory states and the chemistry that they've identified for these various conditions. So here is a paper published in 2001, so you're talking 16 years ago now. says the curry spice curcumin. You realize that the spice is actually turmeric, of which curcumin is a component. And so they looked at turmeric slash curcumin in a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease. So this next slide is going to show you some chemistry. You don't want to like shut the video off just because it looks a little confusing. I'll make it unconfusing. Okay, so this is from that paper. So neurons are part of your brain anatomy. Astrocytes, cells part of brain anatomy. And then microglia, more cells found in the central nervous system. So what is important for us to look at here? Well, all three of these cells have three things in common. You can see NF-kappa B, the nuclear factor, and then the COX enzyme. So nuclear factor in COX, nuclear factor in COX in astrocytes and in neurons, and then nuclear factor and COX in microglia. Also what we see, ROS everywhere, ROS. This is free radicals, reactive oxygen species. Here's the ApoE gene we talked about before. Cytokines being produced. So cytokines, anywhere else do we see your cytokines? Yes, cytokines. So these are all discussed in the DeFlame diet book. I've discussed these in other videos as well. But for the average person, even the average practitioner, medical, chiro, osteopath, it doesn't make any difference. Unless you're into this chemistry, this is all kind of a blur. So how can we look at this most efficiently? We can realize that certain behaviors will cause these flamey genes and enzymes to turn on. And here it is. Simply this: refined sugar, refined flour, refined omega-6 oils, and salt turns the flame on in no matter what condition it is. So if you want to see how this works, you can watch some of the videos that I did. So take note again of the nuclear factor here, and we see COX enzyme here, and we go to the next slide. What do we see? We see nuclear factor. What turns on the nuclear factor? Eating these foods in excess turns on the nuclear factor. So you can just click into the DeFlame Nutrition YouTube channel and watch the video, the DeFlame Diet Basics. If you want to see how this works again, you can see, now remember before I showed you the COX enzyme for Alzheimer's disease, the COX enzyme. LOX was there as well. Nuclear factor was there. Free radicals are there. So what happens? Well, we live on sugar, flour, refined oils. This is just showing us the refined carbohydrate approach. We get a hyperglycemic response. That causes mitochondria to make free radicals. This turns on the nuclear factor. The nuclear factor goes to the nucleus, and bam, we get enzymes turning on. We get cytokines being produced. Remember before Alzheimer's, cytokines? Well, here they are. So this is how we ultimately, now look, this particular video that you can watch as well is about sugar, flour to medication, and you can look at this in the context of pain expression. But you can look at this sequence in the context of most chronic diseases because all of them are caused by the same dietary imbalance, an overconsumption of sugar, flour, oils, and these, of course, are heavily salted, which is the focus of this book, which is why in this book, which you can score from Amazon or get multiple copies from the DeFlame website, the idea is to get rid of these calories and replace these calories with vegetation. So you can do the DeFlame diet whether you are a full vegan, a vegetarian, a pesco-vegetarian, a lacto-ovo-vegetarian, whatever kind of vegetarian you want to be, or an omnivore. It doesn't make any, or a pure meat eater if you want to go up to the Arctic Circle. As long as your diet is free of sugar, flour, refined oils, and you are maintaining normal markers of inflammation as outlined in chapter 9 of the DeFlame diet book, you should be fine. So if you like this video, you should subscribe to the YouTube channel, the DeFlame Nutrition YouTube channel. Here's the website and other social media spots that you can follow and learn and keep up to date with the DeFlame Nutrition information.